What's up, guys? Welcome to another video. Today I'm going to be painting Blightlord Terminators. In this video I'm going to be focusing on the armor, cloth areas, skin, and horns. Let's get into it. These are the paints that I'm going to be using in this video. For these models, I'm starting from a gray primer. If you have a black primer, I would recommend using that instead. Now, this first step is a very dark base coat. It's going to be a mix of Abaddon Black and Refractive Green. I'm mixing these two together and adding a little bit of water and then adding one coat all over the model. And the main goal for this coat is to really darken these shadows. If you're using a black primer, I think this step might be optional, but the main reason I wanted to do this was so that I could darken up the model and all of the cracks and recesses. Next up, I took pure Death Guard green at a base coat consistency and just painted this all over the armor. I'm not being super precise here, but I'm aiming at the main surface areas on the armor and I'm trying to leave the cracks dark. And this is going to help later when we do the wash because it's going to keep those dark recesses nice and shaded. And next up, we have Balthazar Gold for the trim. I'm just putting this on my wet palette, adding a little bit of water, and then painting this on very carefully on all of the trim on the model. I'm going very slow here. This step did take a while because I'm batch painting these guys, but it's well worth it to paint the trim at this step because when you add the wash later, you get to darken and shade both the armor and the trim at the same time. Just like I mentioned before, the next step is to shade. For this, I'm using Agrex Earthshade. I'm adding a tiny bit of water to about this consistency that you see here on the screen, and then I'm just going to add this all over every single model. I'm going to let the model dry from 10 to 15 minutes before moving on to the next steps. Now what you'll see here is I'm moving my brush, but I'm also letting the shade do its thing and seep into all of the cracks, recesses, and divots on the armor. Death Guard models are super detailed, and I think they're perfect for washes because they just have so many different textures on the surfaces of the model. If your model looks a little glossy, it needs some more time to dry. Once it dries, you'll see that it makes a huge impact on the model. From here, it's all pretty much layering. Again, I'm repeating all these steps on each model one at a time. So for the first layer, I'm going back to my Death Guard green. This time I'm watering it down to about the consistency here that you see on the screen. And I test the thickness by painting it on my thumb. When layering this on, I'm moving slowly and really trying to enjoy this step because it does take some time. I'm avoiding all of the dark divots and recesses in the armor, and I'm really just trying to paint the main surface areas to clean up and add a nice gradient from the dark areas to the light areas. After you're done, the model should have some nice Death Guard green looking armor with some dark shades and recesses. Here's a comparison of the before and after for this step. For the next layer, I mix in yellow with Death Guard green to create a very yellowish toxic green. And then this is going to be my second layer. So this is basically the previous step. However, this time I'm painting within the sections that I painted in the previous layer. I'm using the same consistency paint. It's pretty thin so that when you paint this on, you can see the layer underneath it. I'm also trying to focus this layer on the areas in the armor that would naturally reflect light. So you can see here that'd be the top of his head and some of the more protruding sections of the armor like these leg pieces here as well. This layer adds a subtle tint of yellow to the armor, which I'm a big fan of. For layer number 3, I'm mixing Death Guard green, yellow, and white to create a brighter layer, and this is going to be slightly pallid. And I'm going to paint this on the same sections, but in a tighter area. I'm also going to be edge highlighting the armor. When edge highlighting, make sure to wipe your brush on a paper towel to remove the excess moisture, and then go slow and take your time. I think this is one of the most enjoyable steps in this process. In some of the sections on the armor, you can do light volume highlights like I'm doing here. Now, this step can take as long or as little as you want. If you're just going for tabletop ready, I don't think you need to go too crazy with the highlights, but if you enjoy highlighting like I do, it's really fun to just sit and take your time, and it can create some nice looking results. Next up, I'm going to show you how I painted the skin. Now, I kept it really simple. I just did a base coat shade highlight here. For the base coat color, I wanted a desaturated skin tone, so I mixed in a tiny bit of black with flat flesh. I then base coated all of the skin sections on each model slowly and carefully. I didn't want to make mistakes here because I had already finished painting the armor at this point. After the first layer of the skin tone, it might look something like this. I wanted the skin tone to be a little bit more solid of a color, so I went ahead and added another layer. Now, these Blightlord Terminators are really detailed and have a lot of skin sections that are easy to miss, so you'll want to take your time here so you don't miss anything. And this is how it looks after the second layer. Make sure you let this completely dry before moving on. After the base coat, I then make my own wash. I mix Druky Violet, Flat Red, and a tiny bit of Flow Improver together to make a thin down wash like this. After I'm happy with the consistency and color, I then just apply this generously over all of these skin sections on the model. I'm making sure that the paint doesn't pull too much, and the goal of this step is to shade all the recesses this nice magenta color while making the skin look a little bit more pink. Make sure you let this wash completely dry before moving on to the next step. At this point, the skin looks pretty good, and you could call it done here, honestly, if you just want to do a quick paint job. But I wanted to add some more contrast. So, first up, I darken the shadows. And to do this, I use pure Juki Violet and then just very carefully recess shade these sections here. When painting this layer, I'm actually pushing the paint towards the section I want to be the darkest, and I'm also trying to paint these stripes here along these divots in the tentacle. After establishing the shadows, it's now time to add some highlights. For the first layer, I go back to my original skin tone and water it down slightly, and then I add this to all the raised sections on the skin areas. For the next layer, I add a little bit of white into the mixture to brighten it up, and then I wipe this on a paper towel and then check the consistency on my thumb here before adding it on the model. Now for this layer, I'm painting within the previously painted sections to add some brighter highlights. And that wraps up painting the skin. These models have a ton of separate skin sections, but they are pretty fun to paint. I really enjoy this step. After wrapping up the skin, I then painted the cloth sections. I wanted to go for a magenta color, and I got my color by mixing purple and red together. Just like on the skin section, I'm going for a base coat shade and highlight, but for this base coat, I only had to do one layer because this color had some pretty strong coverage, and in this case, I was painting over a gray primer. If you have a black primer, you might have to do two thin coats on this step. For For the shade, I mix black and Druky Violet together to create a very dark purple. I thin this down quite a bit because I want the layer underneath to show through, and then I glaze this into all of the recesses in the cloth sections. For the highlights, I mix white into my magenta color to create a brighter magenta color, then use this to edge highlight the cloth sections and add some volume highlights on the raised areas on the cloth. Painting this on, the transitions might be a little harsh. To smooth those transitions, you just have to go down a little bit in color, water down the paint, and then glaze that on the transition areas. After you're done, you should get something like this. And that wraps up the cloaks. It's now time to paint the bone areas. For the base coat color, I mix Iraqi sand and brown together. When adding this layer, I'm using slightly thinned down paint and I'm focusing on the bottom 2/3 of each horn. I want these horns to transition from bright bone color to brown to black. So this is the base of that process. Next up, I use a thin down section of whole red and glaze this on the upper middle section of each horn. I'm starting my brush strokes in the lighter tan area and ending them in the black area. And this is going to create a smooth transition from the brown to black. Now, to smooth the transitions from the brown to the light tan color, I go back to my tan color and thin it down quite a bit. You can see just how thin it is here on my thumbnail. After I get the consistency I want, I then glaze this onto each horn. And I'm starting my brush strokes in the darker brown sections and ending in the tan sections. This step might take a while, but it is a pretty satisfying process. After the transitions are smooth, they should look something like this. It's now time to edge highlight these horns. For the color, I mixed Iraqi sand and white to create a very bright tan color. I then loaded the upper third or 2/3 of my brush and deloaded it on a paper towel, and that lets me have control over the paint. I want to be able to paint really fine lines like you can see here. After I get my brush prepped, I then very carefully paint lines on the horns to highlight them. Trying to paint these highlights along the natural contours of each horn. The highlights are starting all the way at the base and ending at the tip where it's black. I'm also trying to paint these highlights along or around the edges of any sections of the horn where there's these deep recesses or divots like you see here. And that wraps up the main sections on these models, but there's still a lot to paint, so I'll show you some of the other things I painted as well. One of the Blightlords has a really cool looking handle for his flail. So to paint this, I base coated the whole handle using a very bright yellow color. The first layer was this yellow ochre color, and then the second layer I mixed in a little bit of white to bring it up a couple notches. After that, I mixed in a little bit of brown with Agrex Earthshade to thicken it up, and then spread this evenly over the handle. This was a really quick way to paint a handle with some nice shades and highlights. The steel sections, I did a base coat wash and dry brush. For the base coat, it was a mix of Stormhill Silver and Abaddon Black, and the wash was pure Agrax Earthshade straight out of the pot. Didn't record any of the dry brushing step, but this is a pretty simple way to get nice steel for your Death Guard models. One of the Blight Lords has smoke coming out of his weapon, so to paint this, I did a little bit of dry brushing and then added some highlights at the end. For the base coat, it was a very dark gray blue color, and then from there, I dry brushed on progressively lighter shades of blue by mixing in more and more azure blue each time. After progressing all the way to pure azure blue, I then mixed in a little bit of ivory white with the blue and then added some highlights on top of all the raised sections on the smoke. Overall, this was a really quick and easy way to paint some nice looking smoke. And with that, I'm going to wrap the video. I did paint some other things off camera, like the rust on their swords, and I also did some edge highlighting on the bronze trim with pure Stonehouse silver. Blightlord Terminators are definitely some of the more challenging models to paint, in my opinion. Each one is really unique and they're very detailed, so it's easy to miss things and then have to go back and paint them later, which I had to do a lot of. I hope that you liked this video and found it helpful. If you want to see more of my videos, like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one.